So what we're going to talk about today, for those of you who have been to a Students for Life training before that we've done, they're usually like really in depth and have a lot of detail. This is not as detailed as some of the others because we're just kind of trying to open up a conversation within the pro-life movement about the 14th Amendment. And so many of you have gone to the March for Life in DC, and when the March for Life originally started, the goal was to be marching in the nation's capital for the purpose of overturning Roe v. Wade. That was the big thing, that no matter who you were, no matter what exactly area of pro-life activism you were involved with, the goal was to overturn Roe v. Wade. And when that happened, there started to be a discussion about, okay, well, what's next? We want to abolish abortion, but what are we going to be marching for? What are we going to be pushing? What can we all agree on that needs to happen next? And so Students for Life, we have a number of things that we're focusing on as an organization. There's the chemical abortion pollution study that we did, and we've been really talking about that. I know that our Students for Life, we're going to be at the Frederick County Community College talking about that this semester, so that's been a huge push. Defunding Planned Parenthood is another huge push, as many of you know, is another thing we're talking about. Other organizations are talking about that. We're going to be at the Supreme Court talking about that. It's another big focus. But all of those are just small pieces of the actual issue, which is to abolish abortion. And so we're here to talk about the 14th Amendment and why the 14th Amendment could be a wonderful rallying cry and a great kind of strategy to use when we're talking about abolishing abortion on a federal level. Because as we know, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, the decision really went back to the states on what the policy was going to be in each state, but abortion is not only a state issue. There's definitely aspects of it that we can deal with on the state level. We're happy to work with state legislators to abolish abortion state by state, but your value as a human person and your protection should not be dependent on where you live. It should be across America. So we're going to talk about the 14th Amendment and why it provides constitutional protection for the preborn and how we could potentially use this as the kind of rallying cry of the pro-life movement going forward. So, like I said, we're going to talk about what the 14th Amendment is. We're going to talk about how it has been in the past to correct societal injustices, and then we're going to talk about how we can apply it to abortion. So this is the text from Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, and I'm just going to read it. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, and then this is where it gets really pertinent to what we're talking about, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. Now, on face value, this should be pretty straightforward. The Constitution says no state shall deprive any person of life, period. That is really all we need to say, okay, well, this should include the preborn. And if you look at historically what the writers of the Constitution, what lawyers and these kind of men were thinking and writing about at the time, and if you look at the state constitutions, preborn persons were always supposed to be included in this. Saying all persons was never supposed to exclude preborn persons. It was always meant to include them. And so it's not even that we're looking at this part of the Constitution and saying it's time for a new interpretation or something. We just want to go back to what it originally meant and the original purpose. Now, the 14th Amendment specifically was authored by this Ohio representative, John Bingham, proposed in 1866, and it was really written in response to slavery in the United States and the realization that there were people in our country who, even though the Constitution protected them, were not actually having fair and equal treatment under the Constitution. So in order to make it extremely clear what we were talking about and what the United States should be like, the 14th Amendment was written and ratified. And so, obviously, it's been used, because this was the whole purpose of it being written, to help correct societal injustices based on race. Our country has slowly overcome the discrimination based on race. It was all founded in the same thing that abortion is founded in, which is that the Black Americans were not viewed as persons, and so it has a really easy kind of flow from what it was originally written for till today, because the reasons why we discriminated against Black Americans was the same reasons we discriminate against the preborn. And this is a quote from Frederick Douglass, obviously one of the first civil rights campaigners against slavery and the corruption of the government that way. It says, "A government that cannot or does not protect the humblest citizens in his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness shall be reformed or overthrown without delay." And these are really strong words, and we want to make sure that when we think about this issue, sometimes, and I don't know whether you guys have encountered this, there are a lot of people who are kind of on the edge of the issue, who would agree with President Trump and many other Republican leaders that this should be a state's issue, that this is really not the job of the federal government to get mixed up in abortion. But I think that we should all agree with Frederick Douglass that, like, if our country as a whole does not protect its humblest citizens, its humblest members, which is the preborn in the womb, then we don't even really deserve to be a country. I mean, the fact of the matter is we slaughter Americans at an alarming rate in America, and that is something we need to address at the highest level of government, down to the lowest level of government. There's no level that is exempt from dealing with this. Another societal injustice that was overcome partially using the 14th Amendment was gender inequality. And so we see that this is a good example of how, yes, the 14th Amendment was originally written to address racism, but it was then applied to other groups that were being oppressed, in this case, women. And they were fighting for many of the same things. They didn't have the rights of citizens. And Susan B. Anthony, one of the leading feminists, the first wave feminists, obviously Susan B. Anthony lists as a pro-life organization that uses her name because she was extremely pro-life, as were all of the early feminists. And so then, this is just a quote from her where she said, "Men who fail to be just to their mothers cannot be expected to be just to each other. The whole evil comes from a failure to apply equal justice to all mankind, men and women alike." And we would say that people who fail to be just to their children can't be expected to be just to one another, and that equal justice has to be applied to all mankind today. And so that is really what Students for Life and some other pro-life organizations would like us to really consider as a pro-life movement. That as you talk to people about politics, or just about this issue at all, that we discuss the fact that the founding documents of our country and the subsequent amendments are very pro-life. And so this is a quote from Kristen Hawkins, our lovely CEO, that from the day that Roe v. Wade's corrupt legacy came to an end, the pro-life generation has called for acknowledgement that the 14th Amendment protects all lives in and out of the womb. Again, you will have people tell you, well, like, it says persons, but like, are the preborn people, that kind of thing. The people who wrote the Constitution considered them to be persons, and you can get, like Anthony was talking about, we have a tabletop that talks about, like, what is a person, what are human rights, and if you add anything other than being a living human to what it takes to be a person, then you're just going to end up discriminating against someone. That is why Black Americans were discriminated against. That's why women were discriminated against, because we said you have to be human plus a certain race, human plus a certain gender, human plus a certain whatever. And so if we say that the word person in the Constitution means person plus something, then we're just undermining the very thing that the 14th Amendment is trying to do, which is say that there should be no discrimination in the application of the rights that God has given us. Because the Constitution isn't about, like, giving us privileges. It's not saying if you're an American, if you're a person, and you're in America, you get the privilege of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's saying that Congress has the ability to protect God-given rights. And so we know that God gave us the right to life, and that's why it should be protected, and is meant to be protected. I think I pressed the off button. Give me a moment. Hello? There we go. Sorry. It was always meant to be protected by the 14th Amendment. And so then how... I did not press it. It's just turning off.
Is it running out of battery, maybe?
I think it's running out of battery. Is there one I can switch off with? I am loud. So, what can we do? First of all, we have to continue to push federal remedies. I know I sound like a broken record, but abortion is not a state's issue, or not just a state's issue. We have to be willing to call upon the federal government as well as our state governments to protect human rights, because human rights are always ultimately a whole country problem, because your human rights should depend on the state you're in. So that's one aspect of this discussion, to continue working with federal legislators, and then to proclaim the power of the 14th Amendment nationally. So, getting more people in the pro-life movement to use that as a talking point. It's just kind of something that doesn't come up. We really want to talk about the resources that we have for moms, or defunding Planned Parenthood, and that's been a huge talking point, and that's super important. All pro-life talking points are important on some level, but just including this one in your repertoire of how to talk about this with people, to say that, America really, in its founding documents, should be a pro-life country, and we're just not acknowledging that and living it out, even though it already is in our founding documents. Some things that you can do to kind of get involved in the political side of things. So Students for Life of America is a 501c3, and so we're a nonprofit, and there's only so much we can do with politics, but we also have a 501c4 organization, which is allowed to do more, and we have the same mission statement, and etc. So we have opportunities that come up to go door knocking, to do lobbying. I know that on the Frederick Kennedy Right to Life schedule on April 2nd, there's going to be an event outside of the Supreme Court talking about Planned Parenthood funding on a state level, and whether or not a state can revoke Planned Parenthood's funding. And so that's just one step in eventually, hopefully, defending them at a federal level. So there are those kind of things. Educating your community, like I said, just using this as a talking point more, and then also on social media, if y'all have pro-life social medias, to include that in the things that you talk about on social media. Social media does a lot more than we sometimes expect. I know that I'm not like a huge fan of social media in theory. Like I use it for work, but I really would prefer not to half the time. But Kristen Hawkins' videos have saved lives, literally. Like we have kids who are like named after Kristen Hawkins because her videos saved their lives. So just a shameless plug for it. It does actually do something when we talk about this online. So the last thing to kind of go over is some common objections to this, because obviously if you talk about something, people will push back against it, especially if you're pro-life. And so abortion is in the Constitution, huge one. I literally just got told this yesterday at George Washington University. The nicest way to say this is that it's just not. Like, abortion is not in the Constitution. The reason why people think this is because of Roe v. Wade. They are like, well, it was a constitutional right for a while, and it's because of like the right to privacy. The right to privacy confers a right of abortion. The problem with that is, of course, Roe v. Wade was overruled. The Supreme Court said in their decision, in the Dobbs decision, that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Flat out, period, the end. And so this has just historically now been shown to be actually incorrect. The Roe v. Wade was not a correct interpretation of the Constitution in the first place, and that's because the Constitution just doesn't have anything about abortion. It was never meant, the right to privacy was never meant to allow people to do evil things and kill people and be like, well, it's private, so you don't get to talk to me about it. So there's that. And then another, I know I sound like a broken record, that abortion isn't a federal issue. Abortion is a federal issue. It just is. Human rights is always a federal issue. And so our goal is to fight until all persons, born and preborn, that their protection under the Constitution is acknowledged and enforced, because Congress is also allowed to enforce the laws that protect the rights of its citizens under the Constitution. And so we don't just want this to be like a, yay, everyone kind of like acknowledges and shakes hands and is like, huzzah, preborn lives are protected under the Constitution. We want there to be laws passed to actually protect those rights, because they're currently being trampled on with the abortion industry. And with that, are there any questions on this topic that you all have? Yes.
Is there any source for understanding how the original writers of the Constitution understood the 14th Amendment? Because I imagine people probably asked that.
Yeah. I can get you that. That has been something that has been told to me by all of our people who study it, but I don't have a piece of paper I could give you at the moment, but I'll connect you with it, because they do.
So how do you answer the question? Abortion is not a federal issue?
Yeah, that it just abortion is a federal issue because human rights should not be dependent on what state you live in. The same with it. So like your human right to life, no one denies that you have a right to life. So to be like, well, my right to life should not be like forfeit if I go to Texas and they decide that like actually human life isn't a human right, and so you go to Texas, you could just kill everybody. Or you could use the example of slavery, like when the 14th Amendment was ratified, you couldn't just be like, well, we live in Tennessee, so we still want slavery, so you are a slave in Tennessee, not a slave in Virginia. Like that is the whole point of it being a constitutional amendment, to protect people's rights everywhere. And abortion, because it's a human rights issue, should also be dealt with on a federal level, because you should have the right to life everywhere you go. That was not a super straightforward answer to that, but anything else? Yes.
This might not be personal, but I know there were a few statements made where like it's important to reiterate that there's still people and there's still like you said, there are harmless citizens, we need to protect them. What would you say, like if you said that someone and their rejoinder was like, but they really aren't citizens because they aren't people, what would you say is like a rejoinder to that?
Yeah. I would go back, I mean, the reality is, and I found this on campuses, because I talk all over Maryland and DC to students on campus, and no matter what arguments I use, no matter what like topic I'm talking about, we could be talking about Planned Parenthood, we could be talking about anything, it always comes back to that question of like, well, but I don't think it's a person, and you think it's a person, and so that's where you end up just having to go back to basic apologetics again, and just saying, if the preborn is growing, isn't it alive? If it has human parents, isn't it human? And if it's alive and human, and I'm alive and human, what is the difference between us that justifies killing it? Like, why am I a person and they're not if both of us are alive humans? Like, what is the difference? And so you end up having to circle right back around to that very basic fundamental apologetics thing, because that's, they're not going to agree with you on, like, nothing I said in this presentation makes sense unless you believe that a baby is a person. So that's what I would do, is just take them right back to the beginning. Anything else? Okay, well, I'm just going to plug a couple of events real quick. So there's going to be a Defund Planned Parenthood Lobby Day in DC on the 27th. It's the same day as the Maryland March for Life, so I don't expect any of you to be there, but just so you know, if you happen to know someone who lives in DC or goes to school in DC or something, who would like to join us to do a lobby day, that is great. And then y'all are already going, there's already going to be a group going to the Action Day outside the Supreme Court, and it's a rally. So Alliance for Defending Freedom is a bunch of amazing lawyers, and their organization's putting on a rally. We're there to support them. We'll have signs and everything for you. You just kind of have to show up. And so I would talk to Pam, right, if would like to go to that. And then I'm still working on getting a space reserved, because it shouldn't be a free speech thing. We can just show up, but I'm trying to go through the proper channels and make sure we don't get people angry at us. So Frederick County Community College tabling on April 15th. So we're going to be talking about chemical abortion pollution, and there's going to be at some point a training on that, like what the talking points are and all that kind of stuff before that. So if you're interested in joining that, talk to Liz, and that is all that I have for you guys. So thank you.